Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. On this episode, it's just me and Shaun, taking a second to catch up and reflect on the podcast journey so far. We also chat about remote hosting, Argentina and Patagonia, changes in the Cabin Culture podcast, and what's next.
What's up? You're back.
I'm back. How are you doing?
Good. Chilling.
How's mud season at the cabin?
It's I think we're through it. Ryan was up there I think a couple weeks ago now, and he said we have luckily the route that I think Google Maps brings you to the A-frame is almost entirely paved until you get to like our street that connects to our right of way.
Perfect.
And it is a steep hill, and that's one of the ones we almost got stuck with with our box truck with all the wood flooring in there the day we went up. But yeah, he said there's a few ruts in it and a little soft, but I mean, it's been dry enough since then and warm, so I think it's good now, and our right of way is packed and pretty flat, so I think we're good.
For your average vehicle, mud season isn't that big of a deal. It's more like walking around that's annoying. But during a build,
it's different spots too, because like it seems like our road gets, I don't know, flattened or something. Like someone comes with maybe a steamroller or something and flattens it out. But I've seen like pictures sometimes that we repost to our stories of different places in Vermont. It's probably has something to do with like the substrate of the actual like gravel pack, but there's like 16-inch ruts, like, and it's on flat dirt roads. So like even if you have a Jeep, like there's no way you're getting through that. Just yeah, it's crazy. So luckily, yeah, pretty good.
Good. We haven't been to the cabin in months, so I honestly don't even know how our road is faring. We have had no complaints from the guests or the cleaners, but we haven't seen it. It's the longest time we've been away since we launched it, which feels so weird.
How did managing from even further than normal work out?
This is so interesting because I have never thought about this when traveling before, that I couldn't host, because I've only hosted properties aside from like hosting guests in my own house. I've only hosted from a distance. So I remember I've traveled to Prague, I've traveled to Paris, I've traveled to Tokyo, and now Argentina, and hosted during all of them and never once thought twice about it. I remember 3 years ago, I went to Tokyo for Thanksgiving with my dad. And literally the first week that I was there, our well cap froze over, which froze then some of the lines in our well, and we lost water to the whole house. And of course, we had guests there for Thanksgiving. This was early in Thanksgiving week. And I was managing all of this from Tokyo, which normally wouldn't be a big deal because I do everything by phone to like call people and get them there, except that Tokyo's 13 hours ahead. So when they opened for business, I had to like stay up in the middle of the night and turn my phone ring volume up so that when the plumber called me back, I would like wake up in the middle of the night to manage all of it. That was the worst one. We lost internet when we were in Paris once, but that one wasn't a big deal. And
the cleaner that you have, she's still cleaning for you guys?
Yeah, Tammy.
Does she have like any connection or authority to handle some of those things for you?
So this time, what I did do is for Cozy Rock, I asked her if it was okay for guests to contact her if they couldn't get a hold of us. But I looked into where we were staying and we had Wi-Fi at all locations. So there might be like a several hour delay if we were out in the city and didn't have access, or on a hiking trail. But then I knew I could always check in at the end of the day. And so it ended up not being a problem, but I asked her and she said yes. So I did message our guests that were staying there and say like, we're traveling, and they were all really cool about it. And none of them had to reach out to her, which was good. And then same thing in Boone, I didn't do that. Our cleaner there is just different. She's a great cleaner, but she's not a host. Like that's not what I hired her for. That's not kind of the role she takes in the house. So I wouldn't necessarily put someone in contact with her. So I was just like, I'll just manage whatever happens there. And then the camp up north in Maine, I manage it, but my sister knows all the details of it. So she is listed on Airbnb as a co-host and normally ignores it. But she said for that week, she'd pay attention to it. But honestly, Shaun and I still replied to all the messages the whole time because we had Wi-Fi
Yeah.
the whole trip and had no issues. Sometimes it was more delayed than I would prefer. I'd get a message in the middle of the day and try and open it on my app, but because of the data there, I like couldn't open it. But other than that, it all went smoothly. Knock on wood. On the plane on the way there, we got a message from our hot tub cleaner who said, I showed up and the hot tub was at 80. I think it's not heating properly. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to manage hot tub repairs from Argentina.
Yikes.
And I don't know if the guests turned it down to 80 or what happened, but when they turned it back up, it went right back up. So
there we go.
It was good. Have you guys, any of you traveled while hosting yet?
I think, luckily on our side, we have 3 people with the app. So like, and that said, it does get a little confusing because I think maybe if you have the same thing with Shaun, if someone clicks on the notification, it goes away for everyone.
Yeah.
So like, if it's a question that like Justin can answer, or I know Justin will answer, like the first few times I'll have clicked on it and be like, oh, Justin will get on that once he sees the notification, but it'll clear on his phone. And then like, it'll be an hour or so before we like got back to it. But yeah, having 3 people is pretty nice. I don't think any of us have gone on like a vacation where like one of us wasn't available. Got a trip to like Dominican Republic in July, but Ryan will be here. So
you and Justin are going?
Yeah, it's our friend's wedding. So most of our friend group, Ryan's I think a year older, so he's not going, but yeah, all of us will be down there. So Ryan will be on the 1s and 2s.
Yeah. So do you guys have, because I can see that being kind of confusing if you're all getting messages knowing who's responding to which ones, kind of like a fly ball in the outfield. Like, how do you call it? Do you have specific roles, or how do you on your text chain? Are you like, I'll get this one? Or
honestly, Justin's been in charge of the communication for the most part. There's been a few times where like I'll see the question pop up, and then like I check it throughout the day just to even if we're getting notifications, just to see like that chat drop down or something that's answered. It's not bold anymore. So there's been a few times where like he was handling something else, and it's like you have hours to respond. So we definitely get there, but like we try and be on it as quick as possible. So within the hour, probably one of us will notice that it hasn't been answered or something. Yeah. And now that we know that it clears for everyone else, if like you can't get to it, we'll like swipe it unread again. And I think it re-notifies like, or at least shows as unread to us. So we'll jump back in there.
So
if we've checked, throughout the day.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
So far, it's been pretty good.
Nice. So it's just the 2 of us today. Should we talk about the podcast and reflect on the first 15 episodes and where we're at and how it's going and what's changed, what stayed the same?
Yeah, it's weird to see as many as we see in our like Buzzsprout list there. And then I think we got a notification or an email the other day that we had like over 6,000 total downloads, which was cool.
Oh, yeah. I have no idea what these numbers mean, but that sounds like a lot.
And I think I said it to you, it's kind of confusing because it's like all of them are continually moving. So it's like, unless one's like a huge success compared to the others, that you can't really tell the difference between like which ones people are maybe liking more, or maybe that consistently everyone's like them the same amount. But
I get
by
back
like
in
the
my
numbers.
DMs, but that's the hardest part for me, I think, is that we started this, I think, first and foremost for ourselves and just having these conversations and feeling like these conversations needed to be had. And I'm for sure enjoying that part of it. But there is a part of me that wants to know, like, are we doing it right? What could we be doing better? What's going well? What's not going well? And I struggle. This is such a new medium. And I'm also like very wary of vanity metrics. I'm not sure exactly what I should be paying attention to in terms of the data and what that means for like these first couple of months.
Yeah. And to be honest, there's not much to go off of. It's just kind of
No.
downloads.
And it doesn't even
But
tell you if they finished watching or finished listening to it.
right.
So
I
I
was
don't
just gonna
even
say,
know
yeah, there's no
if they,
retention or anything.
right, right. So it's really, that part's been really interesting. What about highlights, lowlights for you?
I think just like we started this whole thing to, at least on my side, because there's just so many interesting people connected with cabins in different ways. And so far, we've got to talk to some of the best photographers that are in the space, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Some really established hosts, figure out how they kind of approached building or renovating or hosting. And then just generally other interesting people. I mean, they all fit into that kind of category,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been cool hearing their stories, learning little bits from them, and honestly getting like re-excited again. Like Devin being such a young guy and like doing the whole thing himself, and like that fired
Mm-hmm.
me up to like, work harder on our side of things. So
Mm-hmm.
you got
And
any
you,
favorite parts of our
you,
trip so far?
I think, oh, this is going to come as a surprise to no one. Pete's like a classic favorite of mine. No matter how many conversations with him, I feel like I learn something new. And most importantly, I think about things differently. I think about mindset a lot in the work that I do. And like mindset underlies everything. Like your knowledge and what knowledge you gain comes from like what your mindset is. And then what skills you learn come from what knowledge you have, which all like, I just feel like mindset is the foundation of everything. And Pete was one of the first people that I came in contact with in my like cabin journey, or at least the most recent phase of it. And he really changed my mindset a lot and has pushed me. So I think that episode was probably a highlight for me because every conversation with him is. But a lot of my conversations with Pete are grounded in logistics sometimes because we're working on new plans or we're working on Cozy Rock. So to get to like take a step back and have a higher level conversation with him was really joyful. I think the Canadians, we've just had like so many good conversations with Canadians that
Yep.
just catch me by surprise, not because they're Canadian, but just different perspectives I've really liked. I really liked talking with Tiffany. Dirt and Glass was such a fascinating one for me because I've followed them for so long and I've interacted with them a lot. They've shot at Cozy Rock twice now. And yet I'd never talked to them or like met them. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's probably been a highlight for me is so many of these people I've been following on Instagram for so long, and to sit just like we are at night after work over a beer or whatever and have like an hour-long conversation is a really fun way to take it from a pretty informal platform to a more personal space.
I think too, it also made me realize like we started it, I guess, shortly after like pandemic stuff, and none of us can like make this a full-time thing. So it's not like we
Mm-hmm.
can like travel to meet people in person. But I think everyone's been so interesting, even over Zoom, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is tough. And the conversation's been good that like being in person with some of those people, like when we went to your place, I thought it was more relaxed and
Mm-hmm.
fun and stuff like that. So I'd be interested to see how people open up even more in person, which is unfortunate we can't do that, but excited to see that we still had some great conversations even over this.
Mm-hmm. That was a highlight for me. Hosting you all at Cozy Rock, even just for a night, was like a treat. Because I've chatted with you guys on Instagram for feels like a really long time, since like the very beginning of my build. And then to start this and then meet in person shortly after that, that was definitely a highlight for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been trying to find like a format that works better and find a flow that works better. I think one of the first things we thought maybe didn't was a little bit clunkier was Dirt and Glass, because I think we had 5 people
Yeah.
total
That was hard.
on it. And then with like the Zoom and kind of internet sometimes working, it broke up that conversation. We kind of had to get momentum a little bit at times when like internet would cut out or someone's audio or either of us stumbling over each other. And luckily that kind of smooths out and you get the idea of the conversation after editing. But it definitely felt better when I started to pull off. So it was you and Justin and the guests. You're the best interviewer. So I like you taking the reins. But
I think that was the hardest part for me at the beginning, is that I'm an Enneagram 7 for anyone who knows what that means, but it's called the enthusiast. So I lead with my enthusiasm in like almost all situations. And it comes from a genuine and good place, but can in conversation be overwhelming. It can lead to me like talking over people accidentally, interrupting. And I think that was hard for me at the beginning, of feeling this tension between wanting to make sure we were having good conversation and asking good questions, and also not knowing how to like hold my enthusiasm back when we're talking to such exciting people that I was like so pumped to be having conversations with. I think that's still a skill that I need to work on, but that was hard with when we had 5 people on the call. When we did off grid in, that one was 5 people too. That was really
yeah, that was
hard.
tough. And again, going back to like in person over Zoom, I think 5 people could like still work in person, when like you can kind of do the lean in or open your mouth like you're about to say something that reads better when in the flow of a conversation. But for over Zoom, I think it's got to be pretty like sharp and cut down to what the best parts of it is, and you're the best at that. So I think that works the best.
As you think about where we go from here, what are you hoping? Because we have a bunch of good conversations lined up for the next couple of weeks with
Yeah.
a lot of cool folks. What is your personal vision, or like what has changed for you based on what you wanted from cabin culture when we started this, and where we are now, and what you are hoping for moving forward?
Slightly more format or something, because in for each guest it's different, I think, because some have a lot more personality, some have more like skill set, so it's tough to do each one. But it feels like sometimes I'm wondering, we have, for the people that are listening, we have a lot of people that are cabin owners and hosts, and then a lot of people that are just interested in cabins, and which we're kind of focused on when we have these conversations. And maybe it just continues to be both. I think I've heard from both in like the DMs, but maybe finding like a middle that in sections of the podcast that kind of touch on both, so everyone gets a piece of it each time. But I don't
Yeah.
know. What do you think?
I think that's really smart, because first of all, the teacher in me thinks that lesson plans are significantly easier when you routinize your classroom and have like certain things that happen each day, different content, but certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about that a lot for busy people, of like how you can routinize your day so that you don't have to think so much about every piece of your day and some things just happen. I think it makes sense from the production side, but also from the listening side, knowing that every time you tune in, there's going to be part of it where you're talking about like real takeaways for hosting or for building. But then there's parts of it where you can go higher level, bigger picture, cabin culture, which I'm so interested in and really appeals to me, the stories piece of it and the human piece of it. But I know that there's less takeaways from that. But I also know that sometimes that connection, that human community you're building around the shared passion, is what keeps you going when the other stuff gets hard. So finding a balance between those two things and creating some sort of format around that, I think would be really good.
I agree. And I think we've started to maybe do that. Like you've started to pull in the like final question, which I love hearing people's, is it a cab? What makes a cabin?
Yeah, cabin or
And
house.
I think that's good. It gives, and a lot of the answers I'm sure are going to be similar, but it's, I think it sometimes triggers a story from people too, as to like what solidified their place or what they were looking for as a cabin too. So, and that happened kind of naturally. So I like that we'll continue to find chunks that resonate and then try and loop those in as much as we can.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. So I don't know if folks know this or how much they know, but we lost Justin as a host a couple weeks ago.
Alive. He's still alive.
He's still alive. He's very much with us. Hopefully he'll make a guest appearance in the future. But that's the reality of something like this, is that for us, we're all working full time. We're all running our cabins on the side. And then this is yet another side thing on top of that. For me, it brings a lot of joy. And so it's manageable, but I think it can hit a point where you're just like, and Justin also has a kid. So where do you find more hours in the day to do all those things? So it'll be interesting as a solo host now with you more on the production side to see how that changes the flow and dynamics of conversations and what that leaves space for and what challenges that presents is going to be interesting to see in coming months. So when I think about what's next, I think a lot about like the space that might open up, but also the challenges and how we navigate those and what that looks like.
How do you think the hour segment that we have, like, I think initially we were trying to figure out like what fits our time.
Yeah.
So an hour felt that, and I think I can feel the hour on the other side on the editing end of things to like go through an hour worth of conversation, cut it all up, and then listen to it again. Takes a little bit, but I don't think any less time is like, I would almost like more time.
I
But I
know.
know that that's a more commitment for everyone. But yeah, I don't think any less time on most of these conversations. It feels always like we're just kind of scraping the surface on certain things.
Totally. And it also feels like when we're asking people to give their time, I'm very aware of this delicate balance of most of our guests are doing the same thing, working full-time jobs, hosting, and then taking the time. A lot of them have families. So I'm very aware of not wanting to take more of their time, but also when they give us that time, I want to make sure that we are getting as much as we can and they're feeling like they have a chance to talk about the things that they want to talk about, because we have the podcast every week and they only get, one, maybe two chances to hop on and have that conversation. So that is such a tough balance to keep it under an hour. I feel like keeping it an hour is like a real exercise in self-restraint for us.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's almost like a two-piece thing. Like first just getting to know the person and how they got to this point, and then everything that goes along with like a build or a renovation or searching for your place or photo, like your techniques and photographing and stuff like that. So,
and then all the fascinating stories that go with it. Like Steve from the land had just so many crazy stories that I did not see coming when I planned that podcast and the questions for it. It was like, okay, I did not make space for the magical rocks or like his amazing wolf dog, but those things happened and they were like such a beautiful part of the conversation to me. But you just don't know they're coming. You want to make time for all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we're kind of, it's an hour is a good spot to be at for now.
Though about all of this, I would be really curious for anyone listening to hear your feedback. We would love, we get some messages via DMs, and I totally understand that critical feedback is harder to give, but it would be really interesting to hear what folks are liking, what they would like to hear more of, what, even doesn't work so far about what we're doing, just because obviously we love having these conversations, but we're putting them in podcast format for other folks as well. So that perspective matters.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear when people are listening to it too. I think is probably because I've recently noticed that like I've always had a long drive to work. I have 40 minutes at my old job and now 50 minutes now. So like I was all gung ho on podcasts and like audiobooks and stuff. I was telling my mom and my sister. My sister's she stays home most of the time with her kids, and my mom's retired. And like, I think driving is like the perfect time to listen to those things because you literally can't do anything else.
Yep.
So it'd be interesting to hear when people are listening to things too. I listen while I mow the lawn and stuff like that, but maybe that kind of indicates how much time people have to put this into their schedule or when they want to listen to things. And then the like video end of things hasn't been a huge focus of ours, just again because of time commitment. But I think too, like the clips and reels you've put together, I think gives people a reason to listen, to be interested, to like go find the podcast if they're not like a weekly podcast listener. So that's a tough balance too of like trying to get some good clips to get people fired up about it. other than the title that the episode is out on.
Yeah. And that's a question that I have of like, how do you grow a podcast? And something I've thought about is like, I know there's so many cabin lovers out there who would be, one, interesting for us to talk to, and two, would be interested in listening to the conversations and being part of them. And I just don't know that, like, in the podcast world, how you get the word out about podcasts. So if anyone has tips on that, that would be helpful too. Obviously, that's the marketing piece, but as people who are doing this as a hobby, it's not like we're hiring a full-time marketer or spending a bunch of like marketing dollars on ads or things like that. So I'd be curious, outside of Instagram, what ways people are sharing podcasts and getting the word out.
So like, are people looking for more
Right, like
photographers
more
and
hosts.
media and travelers and
Yeah, it's interesting because influencers are more likely to be known, right? Like Dirt and Glass, Levi Kelly, more folks who follow along probably know who they are. And those were all great conversations, but also like people with no Instagram account. There are like badass cabin owners out there with no Instagram account. How do we find them? And then when we share about them, I feel like it sounds less interesting to listen to if you don't immediately recognize the name. And some of my
Mhm.
favorite conversations have been people that I didn't know about, 6 months ago, and have been
Mhm.
fascinating to hear their stories. So that's the challenge for me, is that even the ones I know about tend to be more in that like influencer category. And that doesn't guarantee like I'm not saying that they're not great interviews. I'm just saying that there's so much more out there. How do you find those people too? If
Mhm.
there was a
Yeah,
way to
I
get
mean,
like recommendations from folks, because I've gotten some suggestions in my DMs. And the hard part of that is if I'm not at my computer, adding that to the list can be really hard. There's like no good system for organizing stuff in Instagram. So I wonder if there's like a place that we can officially take submissions that would automatically populate our list of
yeah,
folks.
we've said that a few times that we don't want to make it a whole like the focus to be on the social media thing, but like I don't know, the fact of the matter is like we know of all these people in this community because of social media, so
That's right.
it's tough to like make that connection without social media being a part of it. But
That's right.
yeah, I mean, if we can somehow get in contact with those people with great stories and interesting lives, then I'm all for it too.
I'm trying to convince my uncle to come on the podcast. But he doesn't even, I think a year ago, he was like, what are podcasts? And now I suggested he should come on it, and he just laughed at me. But my grandfather built our family camp up in northern Maine. And then my uncle built his own cabin at Sugarloaf, where he's on ski patrol many years ago with my grandpa's help. And like, to me, I think that's where I saw and like experienced parts of cabin culture very early on. But his Instagram has like 4 pictures on it, and 2 of them are not appropriate for anyone to view. It's like a splinter through his toe, like
Heck.
a mouse in a mouse trap, like Uncle Rick. No. Um,
Awesome.
so let's just say social media is not how we would find him, but I think he would be a fascinating conversation to have. Like, I know there's people out there. I know I'm not the only one with an Uncle Rick that has like cool stories. But would people even be interested in listening to that? Or do we want to hear from the folks that we've seen and heard from and know their cabins and just want to hear more about hosting, building? Yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, send us your feedback. I'm curious to hear people's thoughts.
You said a few things that I don't think I talked about in the first one, but I think we asked or we wrote down like a question in our notes thing, like what's your first cabin memory? I think we asked Pete, and he
Yeah.
gave us like a background of that. And I was trying to figure out why we got connected to like, or we started the process of like the A-frame. And I don't know why I didn't like put it together, but my family, on my mom's side, had a lake house cabin, and I think we called it a camp because it was
Yeah.
so like unfurnished and everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, we grew up there. My mom and dad, or my mom's side, had 7 brothers and sisters, and they all had kids. So there's like over 14 cousins and stuff. And we go up there for the summers, and she was there pretty young too, with her brothers and sisters, and sailing and boating and stuff
Yep.
like that. And that was like very normal. We ended up having to sell it a while ago, but I think a part of like our push. And I think Justin's family as well had like kind of a lake cabin thing that they used to have. And Justin had one line in our first like introduction one that like, it's always talking about like, oh, this is the time that like grandpa built the cabin, or grandma and grandpa had the cabin. It's like, wow, this is kind of your thing now. You have to realize it then. And but it's funny that all of us kind of, maybe that's the push behind everything, I guess.
That's where mine came from for sure. And that's the interesting thing about hosting, is that I was lucky enough that my great grandfather, I think, built the camp, and then we all went there. But I love the idea. And just this past week, we had repeat guests who've been to the cabin. I think this is only their second time. It might be their third. But I love the idea that people would come to this space and feel like it's theirs for the week that they come every year. Or we have another guest coming this summer for his third or fourth visit, and he came the same week last year in the summer. And I love the idea that someone might come every year and love cabins, but feel like, you know what, I don't want to have to build my own, or I don't, have the money to build it right now, but there's this place that I can go and it feels like mine when I'm there. And that is, to me, the beauty of Airbnb.
Yeah, I think I'm also remembering like our family trips after they sold the lake house thing. We had like a Kennebunkport place that we'd go to.
Oh, in
wasn't
Maine.
ours. Yeah.
The way life should
be. And when you like, I think it's probably the same thing for a lot of families. When you find like a spot that you really like, you try and go back every year. And then obviously you have memories that get built with that. So that's like a cool part that I same with our place, and especially like reading the guest books that people are like, we're going to be back, and we had such a good time with our family that, I hope that kind of builds those same memories.
Yeah. And I think time will tell, because Airbnb still feels fairly new, especially like it's been around for a while, because I started hosting 9 years ago, and that was in the earlier years. But even in the course of 10 years, right, it's like not really enough time. And these more unique cabin stays and things like that are definitely more in the last 4 or 5 years, I feel like. So I think time will tell if it either inspires people to then build or buy their own, or if that is good enough for a lot of folks, and that just going back to the same Airbnbs over time. I think I worry with the whole, I don't know the right word, but like the focus on money, that then there hits a point where everyone wants to sell their Airbnb, or like wants to, and that like changes the culture of it. I don't know. I wonder if there can be a part of this world that is about those like family memories and repeat shared experiences.
Something too, like the cabin part of it too, that like separate on Airbnb, where like maybe it's easier now to see all the different places you want to go. And that like, if it's a downtown loft in Chicago, which is probably awesome too, or like Fort Lauderdale, Florida, or, like any hundreds of thousands of other places you can go, that maybe like a cabin being escaped and separate from like the city kind of holds the test of time longer than just like the idea of like being able to go everywhere. So you go everywhere.
So. Because the experience is more about that actual building and place than it is about the things it allows you to see. It can be about both. And I hear from guests all the time that like, oh, we went to Portland, we went to Freeport, we got good beer here. But the ones that mean the most are the ones where they're like, we actually never left the cabin. We just stayed here. And I think that is different than an apartment or loft in a big city.
It's probably like a age demographic too, where like anytime you start having like family members or kids or something like that, and anyone probably above the age, I'm feeling tired to not explore as much. But I do have friends that are, people that are just like, well, I haven't been there yet, so let's go there.
Yeah.
Whereas like there's some people that just find the same like comfort or excitement in going to the place they've been, but getting the same memories or same fun out of it that they have in the past.
I will say I used to anywhere I traveled for work, like we're going to Nebraska for a video shoot next week. And my instinct and what I used to do was always travel via Airbnb, just because I've been a host for a long time. And I just like the idea that I'm staying in someone's house and it's a little bit more personal. But since hearing more about the impacts of Airbnb on different communities and housing, someone messaged me and said that's exactly why when I go to bigger cities or places that are struggling with affordable housing, I never stay in Airbnb, because that's a second way to help control the supply and demand of it. And I will say in Nebraska, and then we're going to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then to LA for this series of videos. And we're staying at all hotels in all of them. And that's the first time I've done that. And I still don't know what the right answer is. And I'm not sure. Obviously, I have Airbnbs, but I do feel like there's a difference in like building a cabin in the woods versus buying a house in a neighborhood downtown and turning it into an Airbnb and taking that away from someone who like needs a place to live full time. Anyway, this is still something I grapple with a lot, but this is the first time I'm traveling and not staying in an Airbnb in cities like the ones you're talking about, right? Like not when we went
major
to,
metropolitan.
that's right. When we went to Patagonia, like I booked an Airbnb, especially because I'm in a different place. And I was like, this feels like the perfect place to stay in a cabin and have a local, like kind of give us their perspective of it. But thinking a bit more critically about when and how I use Airbnb, not just as a host, but also as a traveler, has been an outcome of just some of these conversations and then some of the conversations I've had in our DMs with folks.
You want to give any recap of the places you've been to? I think you briefly described where you were going, just the big parts of it, but any big stuff from your trip that super exciting stories?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is go to Patagonia. I've wanted to go forever, but it feels so far away when you think, because you have to fly into Buenos Aires, which is rarely direct depending where you live in the US. So my best friend lives in Buenos Aires. So that was like my jumping off point. So we flew from North Carolina to Atlanta and then Atlanta to Buenos Aires. And then we spent a week there. And then we took off from Buenos Aires, which has 2 airports. So we took off from the smaller airport to catch a domestic flight to El Calafate, which is part of, I think, the more northern section. So Patagonia is like this long stretch of Chile and Argentina all the way down to the southernmost point, which is like the jumping off point for a lot of folks who want to go to Antarctica. Like you pick up cruises there that take you to Antarctica. And so that's Ushuaia. And we did not go there. We went to just the northern part, 2 towns, Calafate and Chalten. Chalten is like a hiker's paradise. It's where you can see Fitzroy, which is in the Patagonia symbol. And it's like just the most epic mountain range you've ever seen. And there's so many hikes taking off from this small little town that's like nestled in the mountains. And it's just, that was my favorite part of the trip. I was grateful to see Buenos Aires and grateful to visit my friend. But to me, all big cities are relatively similar. And small towns are where you get like a real taste of a place. And I would rather spend my days hiking than, walking around a big city. So that was for sure the highlight. And I feel like for anyone listening, I feel like this audience would really appreciate Patagonia. So I would recommend spending 2 weeks in Patagonia, going to the northernmost part, renting a car, and then driving all the way down to Ushuaia and seeing as much of it as you can. That's what I would do if I did it again.
This is a dumb a fact that I think I got in high school, but is the seasons flipped?
Yeah.
Is it all the way up in the north part of Chile? It's the same thing.
Yep. So it was fall when we got there. So some of our photos are just like, and that was beautiful because we were at the very end of tourist season. So it wasn't super packed. The trails had people on them, but we had plenty of time where it was like just us and it felt a little bit more isolated. The one long hike to a glacier that Shaun and I did one day, we were trying to beat the rain. So we hiked our butts off and went really fast and saw like very few people that whole day, which was really nice. And we beat the rain. We came back at like 1:00 right as it started to rain. But yeah, so it was fall and it felt like New England fall. Like there was like all this orange everywhere and it was really beautiful.
Interesting. For the photographers and leaf peeper chasers, all you got to do is just do, I guess you can't link it together, but I was going to say start and
go all the way down.
Work your way down.
But if you play your cards right, then you get another fall in April if you go to Patagonia. Highly recommend. Highly recommend.
That sounds awesome.
I will say, I remember Justin asking me if I was going to wear my Patagonia in Patagonia.
Yeah. And any chirps from people?
Yeah. So my puffer is actually North Face, and I wore that the whole time. But then the last day that I was there, I went into a bathroom in Calafate, and there was a hook on the wall, and I turned the wrong way, and it tore a giant tear down my puffer. And I actually think that might be what happens when you wear North Face in Patagonia. So
Ooh.
I would recommend you should wear your Patagonia gear when in Patagonia, because Shaun's untouched. He left in perfect condition.
Patagonia fighting back.
Yeah, so that's my other piece of advice.
What was like what's your max hike length? Do you guys plan like, oh, that's maybe too far for us, or you just start hiking?
No, if I can
How
do it in
much
a day, I'll
planning?
do it. And I mean, I also like backpacking, but we hadn't planned to do that this trip. So we planned, like, we left. What was weird is the sun didn't rise until 8:45 a.m. Like literally my alarm would go off at 8 and it was pitch black. So we didn't hit the trails until 8:45 to 9 each day. And then the sun set a lot later. But basically my rule is just always, as long as I can get back before it's dark, then I'm fine. And I like to leave plenty of time to take pictures because that slows me down a little bit. So we did our second longest hike was 10 kilometers and our longest was 11, I think, which is, I think 10 kilometers or 11 is 18 miles, something close to that.
That's
Which was a good day hike.
that's a lot. We
Yeah. And then we
gotta,
did 2 shorter ones too.
is it like a lot of elevation change, and then also follow-up question to that, do you drive to like a trailhead and it's mostly a loop, or are you like going out and coming back?
It's out and back. And Chalten is this like small little town, and it's called the Hiker's Paradise because you can walk to like every trailhead. So from wherever you're staying in town, there's this big long main strip, and like all the way at one end is the trailhead for like 2 different trails. And then all the way on this end is the trailhead for another 2 trails. And then over here is another trailhead. So you can literally, at the end of every day, we'd like get a beer at one of the places on that main road, and you just see people walking in with their trek poles, their bags, like coming right off the mountain. And then you would go to dinner at one of, 8 or 9 restaurants in the town, and you'd see people that you had seen on the trail that day. Like, and then the next day you'd end up seeing someone on the trail that you'd seen at dinner. So it was
That's
a
cool.
small town where you just like walk to all the hikes, which is awesome. I would highly recommend that town.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was a real treat.
Food was awesome.
If you are vegetarian, no. It is a very, very, and I was vegan for 8 years. And when I travel, I am not picky about food because I like to experience the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I ate more red meat than I've eaten literally in my entire life in the last 2 weeks because I don't eat red meat at all at home. The only meat I'll eat is chicken and fish. And even those, I try and limit them and eat mostly vegan, but I ate so much fucking red meat over the last 2 weeks and my body handled it like a champ. Like I really can't complain. Shaun might disagree. I farted more than normal, but
18-mile hikes could be, could be what you need.
Yeah.
Some extra protein.
But I will say I did think about it from a vegan perspective, and I was like, damn, this would have been really hard. Because even salads, they have really shitty salads because no one eats them. So they don't know how to make good salads. Like it would be really hard to eat as a vegan. There was one vegan restaurant in Chalten. And other than that, if you go to any of the other restaurants, there's like not much on the menus for you. So
Just the house salad.
Yeah, that's it. And it's like really bad. I'll warn you ahead of time.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
There was one.
Yeah.
There was a like Italian-ish restaurant that was pretty good that you could probably get something, but the moral of the story is you can't get a lot.
Ooh, are you dumping all your pictures and anything else that you took while you're there anywhere special or on Cozy Rock, or
Oh, good question.
how
I
can
wasn't planning to, but
/
maybe
everyone
I
else
will.
see?
I've been keeping them off Cozy Rock because I'm like, people aren't here for my personal travels. They're here for the cabin. But maybe I'll drop something on my stories if I share them somewhere. Because it is just epically beautiful. So I'll see what I can do. But I have to take off because Layla has her agility class tonight. I feel like I'm chauffeuring my teenager around to her different activities.
Get after it, Layla.
Yeah. But Shaun, what a treat to talk just the 2 of us.
Glad you're back.
All right. It was good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast in a review. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can always find us on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and the chalet frame, spelled the CHALA frame. Looking forward to next week. Thanks for joining us.